helped support or sponsor our broader event. I'm joined this morning by Meredith. Meredith Garofalo?
Garofalo.
Yeah, see, I am not the trained journalist as you are, and so I did not ask you ahead of your bio. But she's a certified broadcast meteorologist as designated by the American Meteorological Society, and is a science and space journalist. She's the senior meteorologist for News 12 New York, covering the Valley, Long Island, the Brooklyn, and Bronx. She's nicknamed Rocket Girl and has been a panel moderator at both the 35th and 36th Space Symposium, the 2018 AMS Summer Conference, and the 2021 Satellite Conference. She was invited back to 2022 Satellite. She also has served as a judge for the Space Foundation Space Technology Hall of Fame and was the inaugural Valparaiso University Alumni Association First Decade Achievement Award in 2018. All of that is aside because the important part of her bio is she is an accomplished singer and actor. You probably have been wondering if you recognized her, and that is because she sang the national anthem at a Denver Broncos game in 2018, and then for the Cleveland Indians in 2021, having absolutely no loyalty to a single sport or team. She has been recognized for her work numerous times over the decade, and we're excited to have her here today.
I'm so glad to be back. And the last time I was in the chair being interviewed, and now, I get to do the interview with the one and only Tim Kurtzman. So this is going to be fun, Chris. We're going to talk about some great things. And I think we all know a lot about Chris. It's funny, right before this, I was looking for his bio, and we realized there wasn't a bio on the website. But of course, we all have LinkedIn, and LinkedIn's fantastic. So for almost a decade, he served in the United States Army. So thank you so much for your service. And then he went on to have such a fantastic background working for Mission Essential, the CIA, Humanity in Space. I mean, we talk about singing. This guy's the real deal here, too. Fully Human Supplements, Frontier Supplements, and now the co-founder and the executive director for Foundation for the Future. I am absolutely honored to be sitting in the chair with you today to talk about a conversation that I think we all are starting to focus on as we move forward, because the big question is, we have so many things we're doing here on Earth, but now as we move forward in time, Tim, we need to start focusing on funding in space and finding the funding to get these projects going, whether it's human exploration or being able to live in space or doing science in space. So let's start off talking about with long-term space financing. How can we accomplish that, and how can people get more interested in something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Meredith. So we've seen over the past few years a ton of news come out about space, money flowing into space. Now there's people headed into space. We heard yesterday how we're on track with just a handful of companies flying people to space to bring more people into space over the next 3 to 5 years than have ever been up into space in history. And so with all of that in mind, there's a sense that, there's, a lot of investment in space. We're good. The problem is almost all of that money is either venture capital funds, a government contract, or a handful of, I think the polite term is high net worth individual. And that money looks very similar to the sort of money that opened up the Old West. And during that time, we saw a handful of extremely wealthy people, a handful of companies with government contracts, build the railroads and create this gilded era that yielded some of the first antitrust laws, yielded a lot of pushback against the idea that one or two companies could entirely control access to the next frontier of development. And so what we here at the foundation are trying to do is prevent that from happening again and get the public excited about the idea that there's plenty of tools to invest in space, and both public and private, whether it's crowdfunding or bonds. And we just need to start getting policymakers here in DC and elsewhere familiar with the idea that space is just another place to invest in. And so it needs to be treated as such.
That's a really good point. And I really like how you go back to the frontier days. I mean, we read about it in history. Now we are making history as this is that next step, that next challenge that we have to face as a nation. And so finding other ways to invest, to become part of this, because as you were talking about, I mean, not everybody has millions or billions of dollars to say, yeah, I want to send a crew to space. This is easy. Some people want to have those long-term goals, just like the settlers wanted to move across the country, just like they wanted to get things going all across America when things were just starting off. And so when you talk about, we know companies, okay, that's fine. But what about private, investors, like families, like people that are going to be watching that maybe aren't at that higher level? How can they get more involved, especially through the foundation?
Yeah, so one of the things, so to answer your question first, I'm work in DC, and so I'm used to people answering the question they want and then maybe getting back to the question asked. So I'll answer the question asked first before getting to what I want. So with the foundation, so we're a nonprofit, and what we're entirely supported by our members, both individual and corporate, and we look to those people with, like many of those of you watching right now. Most months we have about 6,000 of you on the live stream. We look to you to help us with three things. The first is ideas. So we've written some legislation over the past year. Some of it's been passed into law. Some of it's still pending. Every single one of those was the product of dozens of people, dozens of iterations, making it better. And so we need your ideas. And so there's resources on the website that you can use to reach out to us with ideas and solutions. So please do. The second category is we don't know the right people we need to know. I met Meredith at a symposium this last year, introduced by Lee, who was yesterday's host. And so those sort of introductions that we need more of. Again, you can do that on the website. Reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn, and make those introductions. And the final piece, as I said, we're a nonprofit, and so we rely on donations from viewers like you. But to the broader question of how can the average family get involved in investing in space, the retail investor? And so right now, there's a fairly limited number of ways to do that. On the stock side, there's ARK, which is a exchange traded fund that essentially takes an index of currently publicly tradable space companies, lets you invest in them without having to buy individual stock. There's the company Space Ventures, which is essentially Kickstarter, plus some extra vetting and compliance work layered on top of it for the space sector. I know that both the founders of that, and they take great pride in curating the space companies that they allow on the platform, but that regular people like you and I can invest in. And what we're pushing for in some of our legislative efforts is even more ways for the average person to get involved, whether it is enabling people to buy bonds that directly go to invest in space infrastructure. You can buy US Treasury bonds. We're trying to have essentially space bonds be issued by Treasury for that purpose. We're trying to bring large institutional investors like Barclays, Bank of America, BlackRock into the sector. So that way, average workers' pension funds and 401ks are being invested in this sector passively or actively. And so we're trying to make this more like every other sector, admittedly, a boring sector. We want this to look more like seaports and airport investments than a dot-com bubble. So I think that is the extremely long-winded answer to what was probably a simple question.
Well, I was going to say, I actually had chills when you were talking about that because, I think especially for some of these future generations, I mean, you think of the 70s and 80s on, and a lot of people had bonds and had things like that from their grandparents or from their parents. And now, I mean, these younger generations are, I mean, you ask them, what's a bond? Like, oh, it's something between me and my best friend. Like, I don't think
Yes.
they understand what this can do. And it's very interesting that you're talking about people can, instead of their 401k going into X, they can now go into Y, which is going into space, which is a whole different thing. I mean, there are a lot of risks with this, or is it something that once we get a policy in place, it is going to be like starting your savings account or getting that 401k that you'll have for the rest of your life?
Yeah, so right now, one of the things I do here at the foundation is run the trade association for finance companies that invest in space. And so as part of that, I talk with a lot of different companies in the finance sector, and those companies that are not involved in space say they aren't for this same reasons, basically verbatim, doesn't matter where it's at, and that is we can't measure the risk. That's not to say it's risky. That's to say they don't have a model to do that. In many of these cases, some of the large investment firms that'll invest billions of dollars per deal have models that they've used for copper mines, for instance. And they know how much copper is going to come out of the ground every year for the next 100 years. And so they can estimate what's the risk going to be to them. But for space, many of them don't know what's happening in 6 months, and so can't judge the risk there. And so in that case, it is riskier because we don't know the risk to a lot of this. And so what we're looking to do is push policies that can help buy down some of that risk. One of them is a investment corporation for space that would issue federal-backed loan guarantees for large space projects. And so this would be a use for those bonds. And so instead of investing in a space company and not knowing the risk of whether it's going to fail or not, now you're investing in a bond that's backed by the federal government. Maybe it has a lower return, but it's part of your diversified portfolio. And then this corporation uses that to guarantee loans from private investors, from these large banks into the space company. And so you can know you're helping build the broader space ecosystem. We're talking with a couple banks who are looking to do dedicated space-related accounts. And so whether that's rewards on your credit card that then get donated to space charities of your choice or invested in space funds, that's one thing. Another would be directly enabling you to buy into some of these investment funds that typically you would require accredited investment certificates, but being able to bundle those investments and buy in that way. So there is still some risk, but we're trying to work with everything from regulators through Congress to help buy some of that down for institutional investors and retail ones.
I really like that. And I think it's just fascinating to think that's where we're going with investments, with finances moving forward. So now we focus on, we're in 2022. Looking at 2023 and beyond, we're going to start to focus on what are these next space projects and how are we going to get those funded? I mean, you think about the goals to get more men and women on the moon and beyond. And so how can we come together, and especially through the foundation, accomplish this looking ahead and this funding of those projects that are going to start this year, but most specifically next year and for the next couple of decades?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that at our core of everything we're doing is explaining and reinforcing that space needs those boring things done for it. Most of us have no idea how or why roads are repaired when they're repaired. Bridges get put in and we're like, I I suppose I know how this works because I read when I was a child about bridges. But they're just in the background of our head. And so, as much as possible, we're trying to move a lot of these long term things for space into that boring category. Because, in part, once something's boring, it's not viewed as risky. It's viewed as just another thing that happens. We don't question why airports are expanded. Here in DC, there's just a extremely long project at Reagan National Airport to expand the airport, make it a lot nicer and more functional. And yeah, there's a little inconvenient, but everybody's like, yeah, of course, airport gets fixed up, gets expanded. But if somebody said, oh, and we're adding a spaceport, everybody would there would be a lot more questions about why here, why now. But that we don't want that to be the question. We don't want the narrative to be about how this is something wild and new. We want it to be a natural evolution of how humans travel. We used to just walk everywhere. Nobody questions why we're driving, even though in the 20s there was a lot of concern that if humans, especially women, traveled over 20 miles an hour, parts of their body were going to leave them. Like for women's uteruses were supposed to fall out at excess of 20 miles an hour.
I did not know this practice.
Yeah, no, scary thing. So don't drive over 20 if you want to have a child. Air flight, people assumed, oh, if we go over a certain number of miles an hour in the air, we're going to be flattened and turn into putty. Didn't happen. And so a lot of these things, they're natural evolutions building on each other. And we trying to make space flight seem that way because it is. So that's a huge piece of what we're doing going forward is that education. Another piece is making the workforce development for space a lot more accessible. Right now, most space companies are dying for skilled labor. Not rocket scientists, they have plenty of those. They're dying for those welders, those machinists, those pipe fitters, because turns out those are the ones in short supply. And in many cases, it's because the people doing those jobs have no concept that they could be doing it to build a rocket, to build a space station. They don't think they're smart enough, good enough, or insert adjective here. And so we have to, in working with our educational partners, are working to change that, because you can weld a wrench, you can weld a rocket. It's different material, but at its core, it's the mechanics of that welding, that machining that's different. So those are really two huge things that all come back to making people understand this is for real, this is normal, and they can help.
Absolutely. I mean, and we think about where the job force is, and there are, are people that are unemployed. There are people that are looking for that next step. And it sounds like Foundation for the Future is a great resource if they have those questions, that they can come to you and say, hey, you know what? I've been a welder my whole life, but my business went under. Now I'm looking for that next chapter. And it seems like, because this is going to be such a critical part of our future space, that people can start reaching out and people can start networking with yourself or your teammates to say, hey, I have an idea. This idea is already going on. How can we come together and I can move forward with my life with space as part of it as well?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And whether it is workers or educators at technical and community colleges reaching out, we have this all the time, saying, hey, we want to be involved in space, but we're not in a space area. How can we do that? One of the things we're working on this year is creating essentially a franchise model for technical schools to build their own space programs that at little to no cost to them, they can have their teachers upskilled to make them space ready. And that could be anywhere. I mean, we're working with Scranton, Pennsylvania through Midland, Texas. These are not places you associate with space, but they are going to be hubs in their own right to different pieces of this new space revolution. And so that's definitely something that we want to hear people reaching out and connecting so we can then facilitate that connection. And on the business side, again, we help facilitate those introductions between new companies and funding sources and vice versa to help make sure that there's that deal flow for the capital market, but also that the long-term health of the sector and the US industrial base is there.
I think a lot of people don't realize this, and this is something I've actually talked about on other panels and whatnot, is you didn't have to start off being interested in space to get into space. I mean, my whole career, I was focused on weather and science, and now here I am over the last 5 years, and I'm totally, no pun intended, orbiting in a different direction now.
Yeah.
And I'm passionate about it. I'm changing my storytelling to telling those stories of not just the rocket launches, but space. So I think anybody that watches this or maybe is watching this and thinking of a family member or a friend that might have had that interest, like you see them peek at the TV when there is something about a launch or there's something about something brand new that we're trying to do in space, we can nudge those people to say it's okay to have that second change in your life and now go into more of that direction of space, and whether it's space exploration or building in space and beyond.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. A good friend of mine, I tell a story of his that he grew up in Eastern Canada, son of a crab fisherman. If you know anything about crab fishermen, that's a generational profession. The boats are passed down from father to son type thing. And he always knew he didn't want to do that. He wanted something different, but that was completely outside anything his entire family could conceive of. That was just not done. He ended up going to New York City, getting a PhD, and actually designing and patenting some new financial tools based on automated trading for Wall Street in the 80s. We didn't know that was a thing in the 80s, and rose to become senior VP in the C-suite of multiple Wall Street banks over the years. Now he runs a couple different venture and investment firms for space, but he often talks about the struggle it was to find his way into finance and then space, but it didn't need to be. And so he wants to make sure he's the last one that struggles to get there, because ultimately there's not defined paths here in space. I'm a political science major. I did intelligence work all my career. That's not terribly applicable to what people think of as space. I'm not designing rockets. I'm not looking at stars. But there's such a wide open breadth of jobs and needs here in the sector that it doesn't really matter what it is you do or are passionate about. There's going to be a need for it. Maybe with the exception of underwater basket weaving. Maybe. There might be still something. I just don't know what it is yet.
Underwater. I was always told that in college. Oh, you can take like your curriculum class of underwater basket weaving, but now you can actually take space-related classes.
Yeah, there you go.
It's so fascinating. And I think there's a place in space for everybody. Just like when our founding fathers, or going back to the frontier days, I mean, so much of our history has been exploration and, coming into this continent and making a difference and then expanding. And now, instead of expanding out, now we're starting to expand up, which is fantastic. And so I think whether you're young, whether you're old, whether you have a degree, whether you don't, whether you're trying to figure out to do with the rest of your life, Tim, there's a place in space for all of us here on Earth.
Yeah, and it very much is different than recent industrial revolutions we've had, in that there is that spot for everybody. With the internet, it was a lot of openness, and it connected people. But to work in it, to innovate in it, there was a sense you needed specialized skills. But here in space, it very much is that frontier mindset that has built America. I mean, that is why the US prospered, is we had that frontier to work on. It invigorated us spiritually, it helped us prosper economically. And you're right, we have a chance to do that again, but do it right instead of exploiting people like we as a country did throughout our expansion from the 17th to the 20th century. We have a chance to create a frontier where those who dare and take those risks are the ones that bear the cost. We're not building on the backs of indigenous people, slave labor, and others. But we get to continue that tradition of, in the 18th century, conquering the land with wagon and horse, or the 19th century with sail and ship at the sea, or the 20th as we led the air revolution. Now it's time to take that into the 21st century and show that America is as limitless as this new frontier.
I love it. I mean, and now it's rockets and satellites and international space stations and all that fun stuff. But we have about a minute left, and everything you've said has been great. And I'm sure you and I, Tim, we could just talk hours about this. But is there any closing remarks or anything that you want to leave people with or say about the foundation? Because I personally can say that I got involved with the foundation about a year ago, almost a year ago coming up. And now I'm hooked, I'm sold. And I'm sure there's a lot of other people that'll watch this or hear about this that want to get involved now moving forward too.
Yeah, and I like to, in relation to getting involved with this, I like to tell the story of Ernest Shackleton, who was first person, led the first expedition across the Antarctic. And he placed a newspaper ad, and this is something that we at the foundation probably would place a similar one, where he said, "Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success." And that gets to a challenge worth doing. By the way, he had over 5,000 people sign up for that expedition, not because there was an economic depression, but because they saw that this was a challenge they wanted to help accomplish. And that's what we are working on here, is a challenge we think it's worth doing, in opening up space for the rest of us through this long-term development of space. And so if that's a challenge that resonates with you, we want to hear from you. If you're a policymaker and want to rise to that challenge, let us help you. And so I think with that, I will avoid stealing any of David's time further.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. David, I think I'm turning the floor over to you, but go space. And hey, I'm a storyteller, so talk to Tim, talk to me. Let's tell those stories. Let's get people excited about space.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith.
What a great segue. By the way, Tim, I'm going to have to use that in all of our job recruiting right now. Use that inspirational statement. It's like caveat emptor if you want to join a startup in space.
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty cool. Yeah, thanks for being here today, David. It's really excited to bring you in here. And for those of you who are out on the live stream, which is most of you, and who may not know David Pira is the CEO of Spider Oak Mission Systems, which is a leading space cybersecurity company that's focused on providing zero trust security solutions. I have a sense of what that is. I'm hoping Dave talks a little more about that. But Dave's an industry veteran with over 2 decades of engineering solutions across cybersecurity and the high performance computer industry. And he is leading his company's efforts to drive an entirely new industry standard for secure space communications. I don't want to take too much of his time with the bio, but Dave has been all over the cybersecurity industry with multiple successful startups, turnarounds, multiple master's degrees, and is, if you haven't gotten the sense already, incredibly intelligent, incredibly successful, and we're excited to have him here.
I hope I live up to that. I feel like the more time I spend in space, I feel like, wow, I really don't know a lot. But I want to make this conversational and a little less, me presenting as much as starting a conversation. And I love, Tim, your metaphor and idea of that, we can avoid the mistakes of the past as we chart these new frontiers. And I often think about beyond the first settlers and, some of the, interactions that they had with the folks who are already there. It's like, then how do you establish norms, culture, and safe practices out there? It's like, were the locomotives and the robber barons and the people running the trains and building all that infrastructure, were they in charge of it? Was the government in charge of it? And I do often think a lot about how we're going to be building space as the frontier, and not just who are the leading companies, but who's going to be setting up the practices, standards, norms, and expectations. You have to appreciate, for a long time, the adventure of going to space was about, I hope the rocket makes it. Like, I hope we get there. And not a lot of thought was like, okay, we're here. And then things like space debris is a problem. What a problem to have. Like, we didn't even think we could get something up there. And now we talk about our increasing reliance on the infrastructure of space, not just for people, but for our lives in terms of connecting data and visibility of what information can be collected. So there is a lot to work through. Space is not just another place. It has its own unique challenges. And a lot of what I think about, Tim, is how can we avoid some of the mistakes of the past. So that's going to really what I'll be focusing on here. So let me bring up my slides.
Okay.
So as everyone here, I'm sure if you're attending this this conference, obviously space is open for business, and it's going to be a huge opportunity. I think a huge risk for a lot of people. There's nothing given and easy or simple about space, but it is a new frontier, one that has many of the same challenges of some of the old frontiers and new businesses of the past, but also that present some unique challenges that I'll be going over. Cybersecurity threats are real. We barely talk about them. And this is kind of the fray that we as a company, SpiderOak, have chosen to step into. And, it's gone from cybersecurity. We operate everything from the ground station to the people to the satellite itself. And within just a few years, we've gone to, well, maybe we don't need to operate our own ground station. Maybe we can just be one of 17 sensors on the satellite that's already going up and literally treat it like a cargo van going up into space. And the ability for other nations to be putting satellites up. We're in a position now where we have to tackle these questions of cybersecurity. And I don't know if you all realize and follow the news, what we're doing on land isn't working. Not a week goes by without some announcement about some nation state or some private organization sponsored by a nation state or what have you breaching data. Because what we do is not enough. We have taken the traditional stance in the industry of software developers make applications, and it is someone else's responsibility in IT to protect them. And taking that attitude has led us to this unsustainable situation where we are constantly playing a game of catch up and waiting for the latest Microsoft vulnerability patch to hopefully protect us against the attacks of yesterday. Space is even harder because there is no opportunity to go up and say, well, let's just replace the satellite since it's been compromised. Well, not really. Or we need to protect the network that connects us to that satellite. What do you mean protect the network? We're talking about air and vacuum. There's nothing to protect. So there is a whole new set of challenges compounded with the ones that we already face on land. And they're vulnerable for a number of reasons, some of which I've already gone over, but think about the natural evolution of how space is going to develop. You have a whole new set of entrants. That slide from Morgan Stanley on all the new business opportunities is because people are beginning to specialize. Ground stations, data analytics, putting satellites in orbit, the sensors that go onto those satellites. With specialization comes the need for connectivity. Connectivity is a threat. It's necessary. We want to embrace connectivity, but connectivity produces a whole new set of risks to the system. For example, you don't have to hack a satellite. You just have to lie to it about where it is. There's nothing, why go through the trouble of trying to break into all the security layers of the satellite system if you could just lie to it about where it is, and then it will crash itself. Or in terms of payload control, you don't need to even necessarily let your enemies know that you can control the sensors. You can feed them wrong information. So now you don't even have to worry about traditional hacking. You can talking about, is the authenticity of the information coming off of the satellite trusted? These are questions that we have sidestepped for decades because we believed we could control every step of the supply chain of information in the air, in space, on land. These assumptions do not hold with this developing ecosystem of players. And we often like to say all the things that we do today, like let's just recover our network, let's rebuild the servers, let's redeploy endpoints to our users. Literally none of that will work in space because there is no geek squad in space. You have this asset flying around. So this is treated as something special, something expensive. And once it's compromised, you can't get it back in the traditional sense. So you need to make it not just hard, but mathematically impossible to compromise those assets. So that's kind of where we've come in. It's been a really interesting journey, honestly. As a company talking about the intersection of space and cybersecurity, there's a lot of interest and excitement about building space, much like in the old West, building the locomotives and all that. But the idea of like setting up a town and providing safety for the people in and around the towns and developing infrastructure so that you have sustainable development. We are one of the few companies talking about that, and cybersecurity is just one lens of it. So getting everything into orbit and allowing people easy access to space is important, and it is the right thing that the investment community is focused on. We want to make sure that those assets are protected. And so we've developed a set of technologies that are uniquely suited to the challenges of space, which are what? Well, one I've already talked about. You physically can't get your hands on a lot of the things in space. So anything that relies on, well, I'll just replace it if it goes bad, that doesn't work. The other things are, well, who controls what? How do you provide fine degrees of control around who can task the satellite versus who are the recipients of the data on the satellite? You don't need to be the same person. They don't even need to be the same organization. So think about some of the traditional challenges of space where we have a ground station. Ground stations talk to and control satellites, and they are a natural aggregation point for the data coming off of the satellite. And then that information is distributed from the ground station to the users. If you just stop and think about that, that's kind of insane. Why would a ground station need to see any of the data coming off of a satellite? Any more than your Outlook email admin, who performs an incredibly important job in making sure your email works in your company, but one of their job descriptions isn't seeing every email all the time. We have come to accept insane compromises when it comes to security. The reason why Edward Snowden can happen is because we conflate, confuse, and combine the ideas of security with access to data. That fundamental challenge cannot persist in space. We need to cleanly separate who has control over data and where it goes versus visibility to the data. This solves a huge stack of problems in this space economy, and why we've chosen to utilize blockchain technology in the development of our product Orbit Secure. So we've developed a platform built on blockchain which I'm sure all of you are familiar with in terms of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and cryptocurrencies, but there are other uses of blockchains and distributed ledgers, one of which is irrefutable, immutable access and control over data. We have taken those core concepts, taken out all the stuff that's related to currency, and really focused on the challenge of controlling data in space. And some of the advantages of that are poor connectivity in space. You cannot rely on a connection to a satellite. It's intermittent, and even when you have one, it could be a poor connection. So the idea of, well, let's just set up VPNs in space. Well, that's great, but for all of us who have experienced VPNs on land, when you have a bad connection, that doesn't work. So you need to have a security system that is resilient to and recognizes and embraces non-connectivity or poor connectivity, and an increasing diversity of people operating and touching the data from source to sink. And that's exactly what we've chosen to focus on in terms of Orbit Secure. Some of the customers that we work with are the federal agencies directly that are focused on building satellite constellations and ground station networks. Others, and more frequently, are the people that serve that community or commercial clients. So ground station operators, satellite radio manufacturers, people who provide traditional Type 1 encryptors to the space ecosystem, people who are handling and operating satellite networks. We provide unique technology solutions to each of those folks. And, you know, in the spirit of candor, it's not easy to break into a market that's worked a certain way for a long time, but there's this increasing recognition of ground stations, for example. Why should they be able to see all the data coming off of a satellite? That doesn't make sense. Or why would we want to use Type 1 encryptors that, you know, we rotate the keys once, twice a month, maybe once every week? Well, why not change them every second? If you change your idea of locks to your house not being a metal key, but you change it to the idea of a code, and those codes can be freely given and taken away, you change the way you think about you let people in your house. That's what we do for space. We're introducing the idea of, you know, electronic keys and locks that are agile and fast and that really open up use cases. A good example, ground station operators that want to work with the security and intelligence organizations want to traditionally need to show we are trustworthy. We have cleared people. We run great InfoSec and security for our company. You should trust our ground station. Our answer to that question is, why should you have to? Why should you have to trust your email admin provider to pinky promise not look at your code? Like, we're on a Zoom call right now. They can see this conversation. The reason why we're comfortable with it is because someone has pinky promised to not do anything bad with it. But there's no technical reason why they can't see this conversation. This is insane. So what you can now do is open up entirely new markets by saying you can trust us because you don't need to trust us. We don't have access to your data. We simply make your data go in your ground station. Same for mesh networks in space. We are now doing something very logical in space, which is connecting disparate satellite systems made by different manufacturers with different radio providers. And the way that security traditionally works in space is each hop in the link is secure. But that's about as smart as saying, oh, we have a Brinks truck and it brings cash to a bank. And then we put the money in the vault in the bank. But for about 2 to 3 minutes, we have literal stacks of cash in the middle of the streets. Guess where most robberies happen? No one wants to break into a vault, and no one wants to break into a Brinks truck. People just want you to conveniently package the cash and leave it on the street, and that's when you go for it. That is what is happening in the satellite community, because we are disintegrating or disintermediating folks who are not operating the system end to end. We are leaving vulnerable a lot of information. And we need to really close up those gaps. So what we provide to radio manufacturers is the ability to close that gap. You can trust this satellite radio because you don't need to trust it. It cannot see what it is forwarding. It is simply moving packets of data along, and it can't actually unencrypt what it's sending along. So that's what we want to provide as tools to the entire community. This is a big ecosystem. We're not talking about when we talk about space cyber, we're really not limited to or really just thinking about satellites in space. So that's an important part of the ecosystem. But think about it. Sometimes the satellite is almost the least important part of the link. Let's say you have an IoT device on the ground and it uses a satellite of convenience to collect the information. And you now want to send that information to an agency for analysis. How much data should the satellite see? None. Satellite's not doing anything. So why should it have any casual access to the data? Why would the ground station need to see the data? Or let's say you have a commercial sat that transits to another one that talks to a third satellite. How much of the information does the middle satellite need to see? None. Today, they see everything. How about the different assets on a single satellite? We have one sensor from one customer versus another sensor from another, and they all travel through the same bus on the same satellite to the same ground station. How much of the information should the actual satellite bus see? Why should it see anything? We take for granted that everyone should see everything, and we use polygraphs and VPNs and firewalls to protect ourselves, which doesn't work on land and is absolutely not going to work in space. So let's not repeat the problems of the past. And I've already kind of go over this mesh networking example where you cannot rely on the fact that you operate all the things. You're going to be talking with untrusted systems. We're going to be transiting information over satellite networks from foreign nations. We're going to be doing the same things we do on the ground. So we have to do security in a completely different way. Just to kind of to wrap it up and then open up for questions, you know, Forrester's done a report on one of the first reports that we've seen. I'm focusing on cybersecurity. So you know that when you've gone from that plucky startup trying to have a conversation with a company who looks at you and shrugs like, what do you mean cybersecurity? We protect our data. And then you transition to, we need some cybersecurity help. And here's a report from Forrester. I guess it's one sign of the times that, you know, the message is resonating. And we're certainly not the only people talking about space cyber, but I've seen a real shift over the last 6 months where the conversations have really moved from what the F are you talking about to like, oh yeah, this is important. We need to really start focusing on it. So this report is available, you know, through our website. We're making the Forrester report available to the entire community. We ourselves are actually working on a space cybersecurity primer because a lot of people don't think about it. Space cyber is not so much a segment of the economy as it is some people's jobs at space companies. We need to do better than that. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. So let me open it up for questions.
Thanks, Dave. That was fascinating. It definitely is eye-opening to realize that we're more or less in an era where we still have telephone operators plugging in the wires between the calls, and they can listen into our party line. So, yeah, did not think about that, and it is really cool over the last 5 to 6 years, this emergence of zero trust across different industries. That is something that has a lot of potential, especially in space with time lag, delays, and everything else. Do you all have any sense of other applications for that going forward that you all would work on?
Yeah, it's interesting. We have focused. First of all, no one company has the corner on the market of cybersecurity, right, Tim? It's a big.
Yeah.
Cybersecurity is more of a cultural discussion than it is a single one technology to rule them all. We have chosen to focus on moving and storing data in space as our pointy end of the stick for our company. But there are many other zero trust technologies, and other folks like Tricep, for example, are making satellite appropriate, robust, and secure operating systems. That's important.
Yeah.
right? That's a big part of like, can you trust the operating system? Because at the end of the day, I through SpiderUp can try to protect data in motion or at rest, but if it ends up in an insecure place, you know,
Yeah.
then you still have a problem. I will say this, Tim, the zero trust network access companies, and that's where most of the zero trust conversation happens. So I do find myself outside the zero trust. As much as zero trust has helped our company and our conversations, a lot of it has to do with we're going to do away with VPN and we're going to move to zero trust network access and really have the boundary around the application. This is good. I'm not
Yeah.
against it. The problem is it doesn't really work that well in space because you most zero trust network access is built on the I can connect the network from all the things to all the other things all the time reliably. But what if you can't? Like think about Microsoft Outlook, the desktop application.
Yeah.
It still works when you're on a plane, even if you didn't buy the satellite
Yeah.
package. It still doesn't like shut you off. But if you assumed everything is a web application and you had to use even existing satellite networks, it would be tough, right? So we are contacted a lot of times because people have ConOps use cases and challenges in places where they cannot get reliable connectivity, and yet they want to enforce security. That seems to be the pointy end of the stick for us in terms of a
Yeah.
lot of our discussions, as opposed to inside of our company in this satellite operations center, we have great internet. It's like, okay, well, then maybe you don't think you have a problem. So that's kind of what I see as playing out.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. When so a lot of our viewers in this section of our conversations event are policymakers, so congressional members and staff. You mentioned early on how there's a lack of standards, a lack of really anything in this space that in part gives you an opening. But what are some of those standards that would be useful to have, even if it's just signaling from the US government?
Yeah, I love this question. Do you know, ultimately, we are serving the needs and the missions of the US government, right? So when people say, I want to do X, I want a sensor that sees this, dot, 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 and do something to make it secure, please. You're sending a very clear message to your suppliers and the integrators and the primes. Don't care about security. Just go to sam.gov, and look at all the solicitations coming out of the Space Development Agency or Air Force, what have you. Cybersecurity probably gets a paragraph, and it's about as sophisticated as make sure it's protected too, please. So that's what you're going to get. So that when I go talk to the primes or the integrators, they're like, our customers don't care. This is the exact conversation I'll have is like, they are happy with the admittedly lackluster security we provide them. When they start caring, we'll start talking to you. So it's not even one particular set of technology. I would advocate end-to-end security. That's not unique to SpiderOak, right? We are a blockchain end-to-end zero trust company, but put aside us, put aside blockchain, insist on zero trust end-to-end security as a table stakes requirement of all the space assets and infrastructure you put up, you will start to see a higher quality of solution. Because right now, what you're getting when you fail to articulate something better than some type of security, you're getting type 1 encryptors, which are like, you should have a lock on your house. Yeah? Is that it? Is that the only conversation we're going to have around security? You deserve better. And if you raise the bar on what you're asking for in terms of end-to-end security and true zero trust, you're going to start to see better solutions. And unfortunately, I wish I could say over the last year that, all the proposals I've seen and when I'm trying to partner with primes and integrators, the bar has been raised, but not by much. And you need to ask for more. and that will trickle down to small businesses, and that will trickle down to people delivering. But if you ask for little, you'll get little.
No, that's a good point, and it's definitely something that that's an easy fix. That's a contracting officer writing that into the solicitation rather than a act of Congress that's required. So that's a really good point, and something that I assume not a lot of people think about, the power of that subtle tweak in a proposal changing quite a bit. Yeah, that's interesting. I wanted to make sure we open it up to questions from the audience. If you have a question, you can type it in the chat. You can put it in the messaging for the live stream of your choice to make sure we get the questions to Dave here. Before, to give everybody time, one of the things you mentioned was this primer. I assume my computer is not secure, and everybody else should. But with this space cybersecurity primer, what's the most surprising thing you found as you built it?
Yeah, first of all, I learned a lot as we're putting it together, right? So to see that we walked into it with, there is a surprising amount of trust in people. We build a satellite network the way that we put, in terms of like, we trust this company. They've been good for us in the past. They're US based. They have cleared people. We will build a secure network. We'll have a firewall, and we're going to we have secure links, and we're going to have a shared secret over, these encryptors. What's kind of struck me is that we put a lot of faith in people. And I go back to the example of your email admin. This is just a simple example. All of us use email, I assume, and we all rely on our admins being nice people.
Ours isn't. That's me.
Right. But it's kind of crazy. And I assumed, and you asked me what was surprising, I assumed it wasn't that way.
Mm.
I assumed that clearly with the intelligence and defense community, we probably have better systems where people don't have casual access to the keys for moving data from point to point. No, we don't. People are. We're on the pinky promise system, right now for satellite communications. But they seem happy with it. That's the other surprise. It's like when I'll bring it up, it's, so who has access to the keys for encrypting the link from the ground station to the satellite? Well, these 20 people. Oh, that's a problem? No, it's like, no, they're trustworthy. We hire good people. It's like, what does this have to do with people and trusting people?
Yeah.
Like, for example, we make a product not for space, or it's not anti-space, but we make a team collaboration product for special operators called Crossclave. Think of it as like an alternative to like Dropbox, or Teams. And the reason why they use it is because they don't have to trust the admin. They don't have to trust us. People trust SpiderOak because they don't have to trust us. And my favorite quote from one of our customers is like, the reason why we don't use Teams and we use SpiderOak Crossclave is because I don't want to die. It's like, what do you mean? It's like, well, right now when I use Teams, they have a fancy data center with fancy admins. They can still see every friggin' piece of data I have. I am not comfortable putting my life on the line for that. And what surprised me is like even pointing that out sometimes to people in the space comms community, there's like shoulder shrug. It's like, well, we haven't been bitten on the ass yet, so what's the problem? Yeah. So it's that kind of lackadaisical attitude. It's like, it's okay not to be a SpiderOak customer, but this kind of laissez-faire of like, I guess we'll just roll the die and just hope that people act in a responsible manner and humans are trustworthy, that's what stitches our whole space ecosystem together, and it's crazy.
Yeah. I think so. Kevin Russell asked the question in the chat here. The is I'm not gonna try to understand this question. I'm hoping you can explain it, but he asks, counting the data by in a reliable, robust way, how is that validated or ensured?
Yeah, so in our particular system, we encrypt data. So we don't have any fancy encryption actually in the SpiderOak solution. We apply encryption in a unique way, which is how do you coordinate keys amongst people with the need to know without involving the server? That's fundamentally what SpiderOak does as a company. We came up with a trick, not a trick, but we utilize blockchain to solve a very particular problem, which is how do you calculate keys without involving admins, servers, infrastructure, which is hard because think about how key management happens right now. We have Active Directory or we have a certificate server that has all the keys to everything. Let's protect it. Our attitude is like, the problem is that you have a certificate authority. You have a central place where all your secrets are kept. That's the problem. Don't protect it. Don't have one. So what we've done through a blockchain is come up with a novel way of calculating keys amongst only the people with the need to know. The encryption itself is pretty pedestrian. It's pretty much the standard symmetric and asymmetric, key cryptography that we use and love today. It's just that the keys are held only amongst the things that have a need to know. And by utilizing a blockchain, you can actually do this in a really fast way. Going back to my example of if you move from like a metal key, like if you only have metal keys for your house, you have to ask questions like, should I let my housekeeper have one or my dog walker have one? And now, if you have an electronic lock, you can do something like, I'll give them a different key that only works during this time. And when I stop trusting them, I don't change the keys to the locks to the house. I revoke the key, right? If you have that capability, then you have the ability to change the way you think about your satellite network. So let me answer the question. So the way that we ensure data integrity and data privacy is through the same way that blockchain does traditionally, which is the keys ensure through an immutable ledger that the data that you put in is what you get out. So that's the integrity piece. But the only people that have the keys to view the data are the people with the need to know. So literally, if you compromise a SpiderOak server, you've got nothing. My admin who runs our SpiderOak Crossblade system, where we run our whole entire company, I don't need to trust whether she's trustworthy. She is. But I don't need to trust that she is because she can't see any content that we haven't explicitly made available to her, even though she runs the server, administers all the users' accounts, and puts it all together. So think about like Signal on your phone for like messaging, but think about that at the scale of satellites and not just messaging.
Yeah.
Signal, the company or the organization can't see your messages. Now scale that up. That's kind of what we've done.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. Yeah, no, exciting. And thanks for being here today, Dave. It was great having you here. People can find you at your website, spideroak.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have spideroak.com. We also have a part of the company called SpiderOak Mission Systems. I know, creatively named. That focuses on, DoD, IC work. So Noah, Matt, and I are really the nexus for a lot of our federal intelligence and defense discussions. I mean, we have a whole commercial side of the business that's not just space focused, but is primarily space. Space has become like the fastest growing part of our business, to my surprise and delight. And this is how you can get a hold of us. So spideroak.com or spideroak-ms.com. Here's our contact info. We would love to hear from you. We are learning every day just as much as I hope I've imparted some information. We don't know everything. And we're learning every day too. So it's been a really fantastic journey.
Cool. Thanks. Well, great having you here, Dave, and look forward to seeing the success you all have in the future.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
All right, we're now going to turn to a pair from Cal Poly, Paul Jurison and Louis. Again, I really need to learn pronunciation. I am so sorry, Louis. I'm going to try this, and then you can tell me I am horribly off. Placencia?
Placencia.
Okay.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah. So
Placencia.
Paul is the director and co-founder of the Cal Poly Digital Transformation Hub. He leads a public-private digital innovation team that's focused on initiatives for moving the public sector into the future. Some of that role includes, working with industry partners to create new programs to promote digital transformation while helping students learn by doing instead of just learn by sitting. He does a lot of the work in creating the relationship development with nonprofits, governments, educational institutions, and leads one of the first Amazon Web Services Cloud Innovation Centers. He regularly speaks at conferences and events like this. To summarize the rest of his career, he has about 30 years of digital transformation initiatives across commercial and public sector organizations. He's joined today by Louis. Louis is a third-year computer science major at Cal Poly there at San Luis Obispo. Since Louis was in high school, he has been involved in this world of cybersecurity through competitions run by the California Cybersecurity Institute, something I didn't even know existed. These competitions were built with the intent to challenge high school and middle school students each summer with a cybersecurity game of Clue. This is a delightful take on a really old game, and it pitted teams against each other to use their cybersecurity skills to figure out who done it. Now, Louis helps lead the design of these cybersecurity competitions alongside other student developers to help make it more fun and challenging to the next generation. He recently joined the Digital Transformation Hub as part of his journey and has been involved in a handful of projects there. So it's exciting to have both Paul and Louis here to hear more about the work they're doing. I'll turn it over to both of you.
Great, thanks, Tim, and thanks for having us here today. It's always fun to come and speak at these events, and I thought today would be a slightly different angle on it. So I asked Luis to join us, and he can give us a little bit more firsthand insight into what it really takes to become a cybersecurity professional by looking at the path it takes to get there from where he started. And I really want to get some of his insights. So thanks, Tim, for introducing me as well. I guess that kind of gave away my age when he said I've been doing this for 30 years, probably even more than that.
Could have started at 5, Paul. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, true enough. But nonetheless, lots of experience in, all the way from startups through big government agencies and now Cal Poly. I have some slides. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Maybe. Let's see. Okay. Can you all see that? Sometimes I know it switches from presenter view to, is it good? Okay. Okay. So one of the things I wanted to do today is give you all a brief overview of what the Cal Poly Digital Transformation Hub is. And I want to talk to Luis about some of the work that he's doing there and some other projects that he's working on as we move through. I'm going to kind of make it feel like the Tonight Show, and I'll be asking the questions and let Luis do a lot of the answering. But as you see on the screen, the Cal Poly Digital Transformation Hub, powered by AWS on the screen. The powered by AWS piece is a strategic partnership we have with Amazon Web Services, and they provide us with technical expertise and services on their cloud so that we can do prototyping for our customers, and they supply that, so it doesn't cost us a bunch of money to do that. They also provide us with reach back into AWS, so if we need some expertise in artificial intelligence or machine learning or ground stations, we can go back to them and get some insights into those sorts of things. Here is Luis. So he's had quite a career already, even though he's only a third-year student. He was the National Cyber Hero in October. Was it October, Luis?
Yeah, that's right. It was in October.
Yeah, and you know, he's worked on a lot of things, and I'm going to ask you some questions about, you know, your background and how you got interested in computer science and cybersecurity in the first place.
Yeah, so in the first place, it was back in high school. I was barely getting into the engineering and computer science intro-level courses. So we had this one teacher at my high school show us, you know, basic programming exercises and those types of things to get people introduced into that world of technology. And what happened was, I think it was in the summer of my sophomore year of high school, he was telling me, hey, I want to create this cybersecurity team to compete in different national competitions to see if we have a chance. And when he proposed it to me, I was like, okay, why are you asking me? I have absolutely no experience in cybersecurity. There's no reason why I should be in this. But I decided to go with it, and he grabbed a couple other seniors and juniors, and we competed. Our first competition was the California Cyber Innovation Challenge. That was in 2017, and it was a unique competition because what they did was they provided these different training models for us to go through before the competition, and from there, essentially, we prepared ourselves for the competition. We went in person, and they had like, I remember we were all in a warehouse, and in this warehouse they had like 30 or 40 different cars lined up. And it was an interesting experience because this competition was, you know, in person. You had the chance to explore these like scenes that they set up for you to understand the cybercrime that was committed, and it was very engaging to the point where it caught my interest and made me want to pursue cybersecurity. And we kept competing in cybersecurity competitions the rest of the years of my high school. And yeah, I guess that's how I got my interest in cybersecurity in the first place.
That's awesome. And in a bit, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about what your view is on how we get more middle school and high school students involved in cybersecurity and STEM in general. And of course, space follows right on with that too. So yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. One of the things I did want to do, just for anyone who wasn't aware, oops, I want to go backwards one. Oh, how about that? Let me do this. There we go. I need to take a course. After years now of being in COVID and doing these presentations online, I still don't do it right. I don't know. So anyway, I wanted to give you all a little background on Cal Poly and why we think it's important that we provide experiential opportunities for our students. So, you know, Cal Poly focuses a lot on hands-on labs, experiential research, real-world experiences. The Digital Transformation Hub is focused all around those real-world experiences where we embed students with real customers solving real problems with the latest innovation processes and technologies, so they get their hands on that kind of problem-solving capability while they're still in school, so that when they go off and graduate, they have that in their back pocket. So they're a little bit ahead of some students. Cal Poly has been around for about I guess, more than 100 years now, 120 years. We've got about 22,000 students. The campus is big. It's, I think, the second largest campus in California at 9,000 acres. One of the reasons it's so big is we have a big agricultural program. So we have a lot of ranch and farm type activities going on campus. So we have a lot of land to do that. We're broken up into about 25 centers and institutes, one being the Cybersecurity Institute where Luis has been working. And we have pretty good luck with our students graduating and getting jobs when they graduate. Cal Poly has been ranked as the best master's level university in the West for a lot of years, about as long as I've been working, it looks like. And we're also ranked as #1 most innovative master's level university. So the reason I bring this up at all is that, you know, the core of Cal Poly is focused on bringing these experiential education capabilities to our students. So, you know, to do that, if I can drive my slides again here. Yeah. The Digital Transformation Hub was founded around a few different areas. One being our relationship with AWS, which gives us some technology expertise and technology resources that we wouldn't have otherwise. It brings us some real world student experiences that I'll talk about in a minute. And what we do really at the Digital Transformation Hub is we work with public sector organizations that range from as small as local government to as large as World Bank. So, you know, our challenges that we work on are very large. The range is very large. Some of the challenges are very large as well. So we give our students that experience with both working on one of the challenges we're actually publishing this week is we came up with an application to help folks who are overdosing on opioids to be able to get naloxone, the opioid reversal drug, to be able to save some lives that way. So that's with our local government. And then we have projects that use space technologies and satellite technologies to help determine school buildings that would have structural deficiencies in earthquake zones for World Bank, for example. So we have a large range in doing those sorts of things. And what we really do is we prototype solutions. We get those prototypes out in the hands of our customers so they can determine whether that's really the solution they want to implement or not at a very low cost for them. At the same time, we have, you know, our students, computer science students, business students, project management students, all working together with our full-time staff to get experience in working through these challenges. And again, these are the areas that we focus on at the Digital Transformation Hub. And what we tend to do is not be so vertically focused, but more horizontally focused. And we bring in the subject matter experts from our customers to bring in that expertise to merge with our innovation processes and the technologies we can bring as well. So all of that, again, is focused on our students. Luis, can you talk a little bit about why you think the experiential side of things here is important to students?
Yeah, I definitely agree that, you know, the experiential side of things is much more important for students because you actually get to, you know, as Cal Poly says, learn by doing. And the thing that I personally find interesting about it compared to, you know, just learning the theory of it or, you know, reading through a book about it is the fact that you make mistakes and, you know, as you make these mistakes, you have people above you that teach you how to do it correctly. And the thing, I feel like that adds more to the learning experience in the sense that, hey, I'm working on this project. I'm actually using what I'm learning for my classes. And if I'm doing it incorrectly, there's someone mentoring me and showing me the right way. And, you know, it just goes up from there in terms of my learning experience as a professional in that career. So I personally feel like the experiential part of it is super important because of that sense where it makes it much more easier for you to learn and to actually master that skill.
Thanks. And one of the things that, you know, we worked with Luis and his team members on the project over the summer was to look at some of the areas that we think organizations need to focus on to be able to meet the needs of today's world, whether in space or not. But we need to help them think about innovation, digital transformation, and digital literacy within their organizations and their teams. And you might think, well, yeah, we're in 2022. Organizations know all this already. They've moved into the digital age pretty well. But what you find when you actually go into organizations, and a lot of times government organizations, is that they haven't moved as fast or as far as you think they may have. So, on the right side of the screen, I have a couple other things that to break it down better for public sector organizations. We talk to them about how they can think differently about their problems, how they can use design thinking techniques to think through the challenges that they have, how they can understand what the art of the possible is with technology. Because you can't apply a technology if you don't know what technology exists, right? If you don't know what machine learning is, how would you think to use it, to solve a problem? And then changing the culture overall in organizations so that they do think differently about their problems is much about what we do. So Luis, you worked on a project with Luke Air Force Base this summer. Could you talk a little bit about that and how you applied innovation processes to that?
Yeah, so over the summer, I participated in the National Security Innovation Network's X-Force internship program. And essentially what they do is they grab a pool of students from different colleges as interns, and they place them in specific groups with organizations from the DoD or like military bases and different facilities. And I was placed under Luke Air Force Base working on Project Hermes. And the general goal of this was to essentially make their mass notification system capabilities a lot more efficient. So the way they handled recall rosters was by CSVs or Excel sheets. They would go through all the different phone numbers and emails, copy and paste them into Outlook, and send an alert to everyone. And this process would take like 72 hours to get, a notification back or acknowledgement from someone. So they were looking for a way to increase that efficiency and lower the amount of work that comes into recalling everyone at all the base personnel. So I was placed in a team with another student. He was a business major, and I'm a computer science major. So I was leading the technical side of the development. And the way I used the innovative process was we were thinking a lot about kind of working backwards from the solution in a way where essentially we wanted this application or this solution that could help notify everyone about a specific emergency or a specific notification. And we essentially worked backwards with our problem sponsors to essentially create this framework and understand the problem first, so that we could really dig deep into how we could best provide provide a solution. And with the help of the DX Hub, we took in their strategy in terms of identifying the problem that the client is having, and essentially engaging with them through weekly meetings to kind of understand what's going on with their overall process. Because I personally haven't worked with a military base, or I haven't worked with the military at all, so I definitely had to understand how their operations worked and what their hierarchy levels looked like. And then from there, we essentially defined the overall architecture of the solution and essentially planned out what we were going to work on. And throughout the 11-week sprint, we essentially developed a prototype to meet the needs of our problem sponsors. And from there, we had a demo day to showcase, and we had a working prototype by the end of the internship. So that's what happened during the Ensign X-Force internship. We developed that prototype, and with the help of the DX Hub, we were able to bring that prototype to fruition.
And that prototype has moved forward pretty far too, hasn't it?
Yeah, we're moving forward in terms of now we actually have approval for beta testing. So we'll be testing with their personnel to see how we can best improve that solution.
Great. By the way, that last slide I had up is the process that we use at the DX Hub for all of the challenges we work on. It's a predefined process. It's based on design thinking. And we find that it works with almost every challenge that we come upon, right? Whether it's an opioid solution or a Air Force-based solution or a Space Force launch solution, whatever that may be. And then we when we have done these challenges, we focus on a few things that we've learned over the years. So we've been around for about 5 years. And each challenge we do, we learn something new. And again, our students are involved the whole way, but we find that it's really important to take a customer-centric approach and understand the customer's needs, understand what problem the customer is having. And if you can create a solution, what benefit you're going to create for the customer, right? So we focus on that a lot. We make sure that stakeholders participate on a regular basis, that we always get their feedback. We get into a lot of detail when we work through these challenges, even through prototyping, right? We get direct input from them through that. And that last bullet is kind of interesting to us. We didn't realize this was going to happen when we started doing these challenges. But when we're working on a problem someone has brought to us, almost every time that happens, we find that there are another 5 or 10 challenges that need to be solved before you can get to that one that's really needed. And the reason that happens, I think, is when we do our innovation workshops, we bring in experts and stakeholders from across the businesses. And in many cases, these are folks that have never worked together before. So you might have an end user, you might have a computer science person, you might have a business person, a procurement person. And even though they might know who each other are, they've never been in the same room together. And when you start getting different perspectives on a problem, you find all kinds of different things that need to be solved before you get to your major problem. So that's one of the interesting things we find in a lot of our challenges. I did want to throw this screen up because it's some of the challenges we've worked on that are kind of related specifically to what we're talking about today. So we've done some work with Vandenberg Space Force Base on, and Luis, you've worked on some of these too, right? On Vandenberg Space Force Base and helping them get to a point where they can shorten the time between rocket launches and make it easier for commercial customers to launch from there. We've done some work on optimizing their weather systems on the base as well. And we've created a prototype for an encryption device for small sats so that the data being transmitted between the satellite and the ground station is encrypted and decrypted when necessary at a very low cost, because small sats are small and big weight and big power aren't available in many cases. So we have a prototype of that as well. Another of the things that I'll mention is that all of the work that we do, all the way from defining the requirements and coming up with a solution and prototyping the solution in a digital way, everything we do is open source. So it's all published on our website or in GitHub. You know, if anybody wanted to take the work we've already done and move forward with it, they can go get that information and do that. So Luis, the work you've done at Vandenberg, what's that been focused on?
So the work at Vandenberg, I've had very little involvement with Vandenberg, but essentially what they've been introducing me to are different aspects in terms of how to go about the understanding of different concepts in cloud computing. So right now I'm getting into like the intro level, I guess into the intro levels of cloud computing with AWS. So they've definitely been training me in terms of understanding different concepts and how I can connect different services within AWS to work with the services that they're using. But that's kind of like the position that I'm in right now, is understanding the cloud computing concepts so that I can apply them into this project specifically.
And I know we're getting a little close to the end of our time, but there's a couple of things I wanted you to talk about that are really, I think, important. One is the Digital Transformation Club that you're the president of, and the other is the Cyber to Schools program, which I think you know a lot about as well. Could you talk about what we're doing with those two?
Yeah, so to give you a little bit of a broad view, the Cyber to Schools program is essentially a program that we have at the CCI that essentially creates a curriculum of different modules that are essentially in different areas of technology. So machine learning and AI, networking, cybersecurity, and then I believe cloud computing, as well as data science. And what we essentially try to strive for with this Cyber to Schools program is we want to give back to the underrepresented communities. So we've been working with communities like the Cherokee Nation, Kansas City, to bring these curriculums to students so that they have an opportunity at, having a job in the world of tech, because at the moment they don't really have programs or classes that will teach them these fundamentals. So that's essentially what we're doing with Cyber to Schools, is creating this curriculum so that we can bring this this educational program to many students around the nation that don't have the opportunities that others have, so that they can essentially have a good amount of experience and learn more in that sense of the world of technology. And then the DX Club is kind of like a segment of that, where once these students get through this curriculum, the DX Club, the Digital Transformation Club, is essentially a club that aims at leaving no one behind and creating a community of different types of people where we can come together and create a solution in a similar sense to what the Digital Transformation Hub does. So we start with the Cyber to Schools program. We bring all these different students to learn more about cloud computing, about machine learning, about data science, cybersecurity. And then as they go through these self-paced courses, they get a better understanding of what the world of technology looks like. And maybe they even find an interest in a specific pathway. So let's say, for example, I go through the pathway and I find data science to be super interesting. Then I can keep going through that pathway and eventually focus on other courses that will give me more opportunities. And from there, essentially, once they're done with the courses, we offer the school kind of this opportunity to create a club to continue that engagement between students. And from there, if they agree to implement this or organize this club, then essentially they'll start working together on creating a solution with the skill sets that they just learned. So that's kind of the big picture of Cyber to Schools and DX Club, is to bring this education to those that do not have the opportunities to learn about these different concepts, and to give them that opportunity to make a change in the world and have that chance at making it.
Yeah, and this is one of the big ways we get younger students involved in and excited about technology, right?
Yeah, definitely. It makes it really nice because not only do they engage together with these different types of projects, but they also learn together and sometimes get together. So we have like communities like on Discord. We have a server for students to communicate and kind of talk about the modules, and it makes it really cool because different schools are talking to each other, learning about each other's schools, and they kind of say like, hey, what'd you do on module 1 of the Splunk fundamentals, or would you learn about this? So it definitely makes it a really nice community for students to engage and learn from each other.
Great, thanks. So one last thing I'll leave everyone with is, and our program manager for the CCI wouldn't let me get away without talking about this. So this is our big Space Grand Challenge event we have coming up in October. I think it's October, on here somewhere, 7 through 9. And the Space Grand Challenge is a competition for middle and high school students globally this year to be able to compete in a virtual game, basically, to help solve a cyber challenge focused on space and cybersecurity. So this year's challenge is going to be focused on a network of 5,000 CubeSats that provide internet access to 200 million customers, and those CubeSats are hacked, and the students who compete will try to figure out who hacked the satellites, where did the data go, what are the issues that are associated with that, how to present that solution to a panel of judges. And Luis, what else? You competed in this event for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, so this event essentially creates kind of like a double-sided competition where you first get into these locations, which are kind of like VR rooms. We used Unity to create these rooms. And what students will do is they'll jump into these rooms as if it was a video game, and they'll explore different puzzles and challenges and get an understanding of what's going on. And alongside these puzzles and challenges, we throw them a bit of, a couple of cybersecurity concepts so that they can, not only challenge themselves, but learn more about different concepts of cybersecurity. And then from there, they'll jump into the analysis side, which is more of a sophisticated side of the competition, where they work with programs such as Wireshark, Autopsy, SDK Viewer, and all these different programs that are more catered to understanding the deeper concepts of cybersecurity. And it brings this, it brings this kind of interesting aspect to the competition where you first start with the physical locations, you find evidence, and then you move to your computer to essentially dive deeper into this evidence and get a better understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, thanks. Luis has a very in-depth understanding of how all this works. We expect this year to have somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 students, we think, from at least a few countries around the world and across the United States. We have some good partnerships with our colleagues in Australia, and we know they're gonna come and compete. We have some others in other different parts of the world. So, if you know any middle or high school students that want to compete in this competition, come talk to us. Thanks. We appreciate your time today. Any questions?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, one question.
Bye, baby.
In running these
Love you too.
events, and as you've transitioned from student to sort of designing these games, what's been sort of the most surprising challenge you faced?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I would definitely say the biggest challenge is definitely kind of like a conflict between understanding like the competitor's perspective and what we're trying to meet as a organization, in terms of there's some like things that we try to strive for in terms of creating like a specific aspect of a competition, but my competitor side would say, I don't think that's going to be super interesting to students. So that's definitely one thing that surprises me, is sometimes I find myself conflicted between both sides, where, sometimes one aspect that we think will benefit students will sometimes, I'll sometimes think like maybe they're not interested or maybe they're not. So I always find myself in these gaps where I'm like, okay, which side is the best side?
Yeah.
So that's definitely one I would say for sure, is, having those two perspectives can sometimes get you stuck.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure it's a lot of fun seeing behind the curtain and getting to be the game maker. So yeah, another question was, besides Wireshark and Autonomy, what was the other tool you mentioned?
SDK Viewer, or SDK12. I believe it's like a tool for visualizing satellite constellations and
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's the other tool that I mentioned.
Yeah, so satellite development kit. Yeah, so no, this sounds like a ton of fun, and this grand challenge here in October looks like something to watch. I will not be entering because while you do need someone in last place, I do not want to be last place. Yeah, but thank you both for being here, and this was phenomenally interesting.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, and with that, that closes out our first conversations for the future of 2022. We have a short day today because our primary audience, congressional members and staff, are heading out, and so rather than keep any of them longer, we're letting them get to the airport, which that mad rush is going to start in about 16 minutes. So thank you all for being here, both in the room, on the live stream, and to our presenters, thank you. This was fascinating. I've long been interested in computers, but as I tell everyone, that is exclusively hardware. I cannot program to save my life. And anything around security better involve a lock or I'm right out. So this was very informative and I learned a lot. Thank you.